The Vancouver Canucks remain one of the league's best teams. They're fighting for the best record. Trevor Beggs of Locked On Canucks is here to talk about what they're going to do down the stretch and at the trade deadline to lock things up. All that and more next on the Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Just download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the co-host of Locked On Canucks. He's loose. He's ready. Trevor Beggs. And Trevor, good time to be a Canucks fan. The gritty loss to Winnipeg notwithstanding. Talk to me about what has made this team so good this year that they're, still at or near the top of the NHL standings.
You know what, Gil? They seem to be getting better. And I think, obviously a big reason for this turnaround is Rick Tocchet, the structure he's implemented. But, even that bottom half of the lineup is really stepping up now, both in the forward group and on defense. I mean, I actually wonder if this is a story around the NHL, but the Canucks have, I would say the best third line in the NHL without question, right? We did an episode kind of going through other good third lines, but what that line of Dakota Joshua, Teddy Blueger, and Connor Garland has done. Three misfits coming together. They each have 20 even strength points in the last 31 games, I believe it is. Like, it's actually unreal what that line is doing. Like, those numbers rank up there. I think they're all in the top 50 among NHL skaters. So it's almost disrespectful to call them a third line. They've been unbelievable. They've been so much more than that. And then on defense as well, you look at guys like Noah Juulsen. People had probably never heard of this guy, or they might have known him as the first-round pick from the Habs. He came into Vancouver this season and looked terrible, but Adam Foote, the coaching staff, has worked with this guy. He was rewarded with his first goal of the season on Saturday against Winnipeg. Tyler Myers as well. The guy was an absolute disaster for 4 years in Vancouver. He looks respectable. And you look at the underlying numbers, and it's, the Canucks, even sometimes when they're not scoring, are playing well defensively. And, before, I think it was a bit of a pop gun offense. It still is to a certain extent, but they're really cleaning things up on the defensive side of the puck as well. Now, I'll say the one caveat, and I got caught with this in Winnipeg, as the games start to feel more playoff-like, one of the reasons the Canucks lost the Winnipeg Jets over the weekend was I think they got caught chasing the physical game against a team who plays physical. So I think that was a learning lesson for the Canucks because, hey, there's going to be a lot of games that feel like the playoffs down the stretch here.
How do you fix that? I mean, you talk about a learning experience, but what do the Canucks have to do differently the next time they're faced with a very physical opponent?
Yeah, I think the Canucks have to, toe the line between obviously being physical, but not just chasing hits, right? I know I mentioned Noah Juulsen, and I felt bad for the guy because after the Winnipeg loss, he was blaming himself for it. And, he has a point on that game-winning goal, right? He goes and chases the hit. He absolutely belts Mark Scheifele, but the Jets go in, Kyle Connor and Gabe Vilardi go in 2-on-1 and score a pretty easy goal, right? So I think the Canucks got to stick to their bread and butter. They got to be physical, but they also got to be a team that just continues to forecheck down low, continues to protect the middle of the ice. So I think they just got to keep playing their game. Mind you, a big test will be starting to play some good teams down the stretch, right? The Canucks, that was their first game against Winnipeg. They still play the Winnipeg Jets 2 more times. They play Colorado 2 more times, I believe. They play the Golden Knights 3 more times. The Oilers once. The rematch against Boston, who spanked them about a week ago, is coming up next Saturday, or this upcoming Saturday, I should say. So, yeah, there's some really good tests coming down the stretch. I talked about a couple weeks ago. The Canucks had the hardest schedule in the Western Conference remaining in the NHL about a week ago. I don't think much has changed there. So they're going to get some stiff tests down the stretch. I think that's going to make them ready for the playoffs, or at least going to test to see if they are ready for the playoffs.
What's your biggest concern about this team as we head into the last couple of months of the season?
One of the biggest concerns right now is the top six, ironically enough, right? Which to me isn't as big as a concern as everyone's making it out to be. But, in fairness, you look at the Jets game on Saturday, it's the Jets top players scoring and the Canucks stars being shut out. There's been a lot of nights recently where that bottom six, as I mentioned, has been the one that stepped up, whereas that top six has gone kind of quiet. So I think it's a matter of kind of finding that chemistry in the top six. Pettersson's had a revolving door of line mates all season long. I do like the trio up there with Lindholm and Höglander. They had a really good game against the Detroit Red Wings last week on Thursday. But I think the Canucks, every good team goes through a bit of a slow stretch. And the Canucks, again, knock on wood, haven't really gone through theirs yet, right? The Jets have had a slow stretch. The Avs have had a slow stretch. The Knights have had a slow stretch. So I think for the Canucks, probably the biggest thing that concerns me is I still don't necessarily believe that this defense is for real, if I'm being honest with you. I really like what Hughes and Hronek have brought, but the rest of the defense has definitely played above the sum of their parts. Are they going to be able to keep that up down the stretch? I certainly hope so. Certainly, when you watch the Canucks play, the eye test is telling you that, yeah, this defense is better. And again, guys like Juleson and Myers are stepping up, but there's been a lot of scar tissue in this market. We've seen a lot of Tyler Myers mistakes. Nikita Zadorov has come in and he's been fun, but he's made mistakes too. I just wonder, against the best teams like the Jets, the Avs, the Knights, is this Canucks defense going to hold up in the playoffs? I still think that's a pretty legitimate question.
So if you're the general manager of the Vancouver Canucks, what do you look to do at the trade deadline? And do you think the team will do a similar thing that you think they should do?
2 words, Chris Tanev. No, I'm just kidding. But I'm only half kidding. I mean, honestly, I still think another right shot defenseman would be a prudent add for this organization. I know they've liked, Myers and his resurgence, and Juleson's played well. And then you have Hronek as your number one right shot D. But I would probably add another defenseman to the mix. It depends what the cost is going to be. The thing right now with the Canucks is, I think one of the reasons they're rumored to be after Phil Kessel is because they just don't have much cap space left, right? Like pretty much every other team around the NHL. So if you're going to make a sizable add, you're either going to need the team to, retain a lot of cap space, which, results in giving them more assets, or you're going to have to move someone out. And that's why on the show this week, we talked about the potential of moving out Ilya Mikheyev, who's kind of filled in for Dakota Joshua, who's missed the last games with injury. And part of the argument was, again, you got to subtract from this team in order to, if you do want to make a big add, like a top 4 defenseman or another top 6 winger, it still feels that the Canucks could use another top 6 winger. Höglander's been on the 4th line all year, has deserved better, is now on the top line. But then you have Pius Suter, who's played well, but he's your second line left winger alongside Miller and Besser. It still feels like you could use another top 6 winger and another top 4 defenseman. I think they're only going to get one of those pieces, maybe, or it might just be depth adds. But, we've seen how aggressive that Rutherford and Alvin have been, not just with the Canucks, but throughout their history together, in particular Rutherford. So another big move wouldn't necessarily shock me. But, if you go chase a Jake Gensel per se, like you're giving up to Lekaramaki, like the top prospect in this organization. So no easy answers there. I would lean towards adding a defenseman personally. Will they do it? I'm not quite sure. I'm going to call it a coin flip.
Okay, well, should be interesting to say the least. And what in your mind is the key to a strong finish for this team?
Yeah, I think they got to show up against the best teams, right? And, to the Canucks' credit, they've done a good job. But there's a stat out there this week that they have the 3rd best record against winning teams. So it's not like they've been pushed over by winning teams. I mean, they beat the Carolina Hurricanes twice. They beat the Panthers twice. They obviously smoked the Oilers 3 times, although that was a different version of the Oilers than the one that's playing right now. But they got a lot of tough games coming up down the stretch. And I think it's just a matter of, not just showing up and playing hard in those games like they did against Winnipeg, but winning those games, right? Giving this team the confidence that they can go into the playoffs, knowing that they can beat any team in the NHL, which they should have that confidence now. But, you go lose a bunch of games to Colorado and Vegas, that might feel a little differently come playoff time. So I think it's showing up and beating a number of good opponents up on their schedule would be the number one thing for this team.
All right, Trevor, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you and your co-host on social media?
All right, you can find me on social media at Trev Beggs. My co-host Kyle Bowen, Bhawan. You can find him on Instagram and TikTok, I believe. And of course, you can find our podcast Locked On Canucks on YouTube. on Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen to podcasts. Hey, been a fun ride. We joined March 1st of last year. We're up to about 1,500 subscribers now from a couple hundred when we started. It's been a ton of fun, and it certainly helps that the team's winning some hockey games and is the best team in the NHL. Let's go.
Never hurts, right? All right, Trevor. Thank you so much. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at Camino Consulting. How would you like to get to know somebody better in an hour than you would in a year? Understanding one another better prevents small misunderstandings from becoming big ongoing fights. Well, after providing more than 20 years and mid-sized businesses, helping management groups navigate conflict and onboarding new employees, Camino is now offering a digital seminar for families and couples. Did your Valentine's gift of tickets to the game not go over as well as you hoped? Get the couples and family online seminar for 25% off for the month of February using the discount code Locked On. Again, that is discount code Locked On for 25% off for the rest of the month at www.caminoconsulting.ca, or mention Locked On when reaching out for a business seminar and receive the first 5 profiles free. Again, that's www.caminoconsulting.ca. Check it out today.